It's a really honor and privilege to be here at your university. It's one of the top 50, and Vice Chancellor was saying that you all are shooting for the top 10 in the whole of India, and I wish you all the best that you do join the top 10 university of India. And it's part of the program of the Southeast Asia Studies is to reach out to ASEAN countries. And I think Gauhati and Special University is placed very well, where you can impart education to ASEAN countries. Many of them want to learn in English medium instruction, and that way Gauhati and University is well placed. And I'm sure now the students from Bhutan and Laos, they have joined, and I hope other countries will join, and this university does become the top 10 in whole of India. Unfortunately, I didn't get to study here, but when I was Delhi University, as Vice Chancellor and the Registrar said, because I'm from Darjeeling area, so whenever I see students from Northeast, somehow we club together, we become friends. So that sense of solidarity and bonding is there. So to be here and share some thoughts means a lot, personally as well. Because when Tibet was occupied in 1959, my mother and father came from, they used to say Assam. My father came from Mandela, and my mother came from Tuting area. So they used to always say, oh, we came from Assam and we spent a few months, and in fact, my mother spent 2 or 3 years in and around these places. So just 3 years ago, I managed to come in my current position to Northeast, and I went to Arunachal Pradesh and saw the places where my parents came from. So next year is going to be 60th year when His Holiness the Dalai Lama came from Tibet to Arunachal Pradesh through Tawang and entered India through Tezpur and Assam. So there's a definitely long history, and there was a long relationship with the issue of Tibet as well. So it's really a privilege and honor. Now I'll briefly touch on international aspect of things and perhaps touch on nonviolence and peace. Then I'll go a little back to history and the current situation in Tibet, and some final thoughts on what are the solutions, why peace and the role of India and future of Tibet is relevant or not. As many of you students, you will be graduating soon and entering the real world. Now in the real world, what's happening is that it has changed a lot in the last 30 years. There is decline of internationalism and decline of liberalism, which you saw in late 80s and 90s. After the collapse of the Soviet Union and Berlin Wall, there was a new hope, and democracy was prevailing and spreading around the world, and human rights was a very popular thing, environmental issues. So liberalism was on the rise, and internationalism was on the rise. And that was the dominant ideology. But in the last 5-10 years, there are a lot of challenges and complexities. Now, in place of internationalism, there is rise of nationalism. In place of liberalism, there is rise of extremism. Hence, we have right-wing parties and right-wing ideologies around the world. With the election of the Donald Trump, and if you look at some of the European countries, the United Kingdom getting out of EU through Brexit, all these are indications of rise of nationalism. And then you see now, just a few days ago, another extremist or a terrorist who bulldozed a lot of people in the streets of New York that you see in Brussels and Paris. Now it's a common thing where there is a rise of extremism and there is violence prevailing all over the world. So the internationalism and liberalism are challenged by nationalism and extremism. Now in that context, what's happening around the world is also that violence gets the headlines. Nonviolence doesn't. Extremism gets the headlines. Liberalism doesn't. Hence, this topic is fitting. If you want world peace, if you want peace, nonviolence should be applauded and supported and accepted. It doesn't get much space in the media, in the international context as well. In that sense, Tibet issue is a model of peace because we pursue nonviolence. We pursue the Gandhian philosophy of ahimsa. Yet, you don't get much traction, but you get traction if you're IS, Syria violence, Boko Haram in Nigeria. These are the headlines that you see anywhere around the world. So hence this topic and the platform that I'm given is very relevant. Now another rise, which is directly a challenge to the whole world and Asia and India in particular, is rise of China. As you graduate and leave this university, if you go anywhere around the world or within India, Chinese presence will loom large. They will be in ASEAN countries, they will be in Northeast, they will be in all the neighboring countries. For example, the recent incident of Doklam. We all read that the Chinese troops came to Doklam and they want to take over the mountaintop. And the headline was that they want to control or have, from military point of view, have some dominance over the chicken neck. And for Northeast, chicken neck is very important. That small 25, 27 kilometers of land which connects rest of India with the Northeast. If that is cut off, the Northeast and rest of India will be separated. So if you control Doklam height, the mountain, then you can control, or you could have artillery reach to the chicken neck. Then the whole debate in India and Asia in particular was why Doklam, why it's happening, what are the causes, what are the reasons? Is His Holiness Dalai Lama's visit to Arunachal Pradesh was the reason, or Tibetan presence in India was the reason, or what are the reasons? The reasons are very simple. Because after the occupation of Tibet by Communist China in 1950s, Mao Zedong, the Chinese leader then, and other Chinese leaders have said, and it's recorded, Tibet is the palm. We must occupy Tibet. Then we extend our influence to other 5 fingers. And what are the 5 fingers? Sikkim, Bhutan, Nepal, Ladakh, and Arunachal Pradesh. These are the 5 fingers. So what you see, or what you saw in Doklam, is the reality of Confucius Chinese expansionist policy. Because Tibet was lost, because Tibet was occupied, extension of Chinese influence and their presence to all the 5 fingers are a reality, which the Chinese army and military will make efforts. That we must accept. Because why? Chinese expansionist design is also there in the South China Sea, East China Sea, Scarborough Island, in all of Asian countries. Yesterday only I talked to former ambassador to Burma of India. Right in Burma, the northern part of Burma, the largest city, Mandela, is becoming a Chinese-speaking city instead of Burmese-speaking city. The presence is everywhere. So an expansionist design will be felt for the people in Northeast and whole northern belt of India or the Himalayan belt of India. Hence, this is a reality that we must face. And then China as a challenge to Asia, to the world, is also a reality because President Xi Jinping just got re-elected and his definition of socialism with Chinese characteristic in new era, because he's going to begin the 3rd era or the new era for China in the global context. And then there will be more reaching out or influencing or expanding to the international forum, including South Asia and ASEAN and rest of Asia. So this is a reality one must face. Hence, what is the role of India or relationship between India, and Tibet, which is very relevant. Because when Tibet was occupied in 1950s, rest of the world, including India, felt at that time that what happened to Tibet happened to Tibet. We know it's wrong, but we are sorry. We can't do much about it, or we won't do much about it, but it's not going to happen to us. That's what the world felt. That's what all the neighboring countries believed. But with South China Sea incident, South China Sea, East China Sea, Scarborough Island, Philippines, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, now in Doklam, in India, now their presence in Burma and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and Pakistan, everybody's saying, what happened to Tibet? Similar things is happening to the rest of the world. So hence, the lesson we all should learn, and we, the Tibetans, have been saying this for 60 years. What happened to us will happen to you. Not could, will happen to you. So letting China occupy Tibet and the rest of the world not speaking for Tibet was wrong. Now, it happened to us. Now they're expanding to 5 fingers. And they will expand to all the neighboring countries. So had international community and Asia included, had done something for Tibet then, in 1950s, perhaps Chinese government won't think of expanding to Nepal, Bhutan, Ladakh, Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, and ASEAN countries and rest of Asia. Because they got away with Tibet. They think now they can get away with the rest of the world. And they did. And it is happening around the world. Even in Doklam, yes, there is a withdrawal of troops from 150 meters each, which means there's a separation of 300 meters, but the tanks, the guns, the Chinese army and the Indian army are still exactly the same, just 300 meters apart. So Doklam incident is just the beginning of things to come. So what happened to Tibet? And what is the relationship, or what was the relationship with India, and where lessons can be learned? For example, similar convention. There is similar convention in Pakistan. The similar convention in Tibet happened in 1914. What happened was Tibet and British India came to Simla, then to Delhi. They signed an agreement, similar convention. On the sideline, they signed 2 other agreements, mainly on trade and border. Now in India, we always say McMahon Line is the border between India and China. But if McMahon Line is the border between India and China, it was Tibetan Prime Minister who signed the similar convention and the border then with the British representative, Sir McMahon. Hence, the border is called McMahon Line because it was the Tibetan Prime Minister who signed the document, who signed that convention, in similar convention, in 1914. So if McMahon Line is the border, then it's the Tibetans who signed that border. So if you want to have McMahon Line as the border, then you must recognize the status of Tibet historically. Now, Chinese claim of Arunachal Pradesh and other areas in the Himalayan are partly based on history. But unless you study the similar convention of 1914, you won't understand. Why? Because the Chinese ambassador did participate in the similar convention. They, in the end, initialed the agreement, but finally did not sign the agreement. But if you read that part of history, you will find the Chinese ambassador was objecting to the border demarcation between Tibet and China. They were least bothered about border between Tibet and India. They didn't say anything on the border of India and Tibet, India and Tibet. They let the Tibetan Prime Minister sign that border demarcation. Now, when they make the claim of Arunachal Pradesh, you can go back to 1914 and say, Chinese government, you never made any presentation or claim of Arunachal Pradesh when the Tibetan government, led by Tibetan Prime Minister, signed that agreement. So unless you understand similar convention of Tibet, you won't understand the complexities. Hence, it's relevant. Number 2, 1914, on the sideline, they also signed a trade agreement between India and Tibet. So trade agreement from Nathula to Shigatse to Lhasa. Now that trade agreement has to be renewed every 10 years, from 1914 to 24, 34 till 1944. Delhi and Lhasa, the capital city of Tibet, signed and renewed that trade agreement every 10 years. But in 1954, after the independence of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru felt, then Indian government felt, that we must sign the treaty or the trade agreement not with Tibetan government in Lhasa, but with Beijing. This is a very important lesson we all must know. So the trade agreement has to be renewed every 10 years. So 1954, the Indian delegation goes to Beijing and negotiates a trade agreement. And finally, the Panchshil document comes. Now, the Indian side wanted the Panchshil agreement to last for 25 years. And China said, no, only 5 years. Then they negotiated further, and finally China agreed for 8 years. When you have an agreement or convention or treaty, normally, the treaty should last for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. You find the even number. You just say 8 years. It's an odd number. Now, what happened in 5 years and what happened in 8 years? Initial Chinese preference was that Panchshil to last for 5 years. 1954, after 5 years, 1959, Tibet was occupied. 1954 plus 8 years, 1962. 1962, India-China war happened. And the Chinese army came all the way to Arunachal, Bumdila, Tawang, came all the way almost to Tezpur of Assam. What it shows is that the Chinese side, they already calculated what they're going to do in 5 years and 10 years. When India said it should last for 25 years, they said, no, they said 5 years. Why? They had already planned to occupy Tibet. Which means had the trade agreement lasted 5 years, they would have occupied Tibet and invaded India. Because India said 8 years, in the end India agreed 8 years, and 1962 war happened. This is how they think, this is how they plan. Hand palm as Tibet and 5 fingers, Sikkim, Bhutan, Nepal, Ladakh, and Arunachal, it's real. It's part of the strategy. So we must know that. So these are the lessons we all must learn. In fact, after the occupation of Tibet in 1959, Chinese government requested the Indian government that Calcutta seaport be allowed to be used for Chinese supplies. Because they say our troops are there, our people are there, officials are there. They find it difficult to supply from China through land route to Tibet. They say, can we use Calcutta seaport and through Sikkim, they can provide supplies. Indian government allowed Calcutta seaport to be used. In 1962 war, Chinese army had better supplies and more supplies than the Indian troops because they had used Calcutta as a seaport and Nathula as a supply route. So, unless you know this part of history, you won't know what's going to happen. Hence, if you want to understand China, you must understand Tibet. If you truly want to understand what is China's next move, you must understand the Tibet experience. If you don't understand Tibet experience, you won't know China. For example, One Belt, One Road initiative is going on. This is the China's foreign policy, economic policy, military policy. What is One Belt, One Road? Occupation of Tibet happened with one road. China promised us highway from China to Lhasa. It said it will bring prosperity. Tibetans sang songs and participated. Tibetan laborers were paid gold coins and silver coins. There was a song by my parents and grandparents. Oh, Chinese are like our parents. When they come, they shower you with gold and silver. They took gold and silver and helped build highway. In fact, Chinese government is so smart, they built a gold and silver factory, gold and silver coins factory in Sichuan, so that you can supply. Why? Their calculation was this gold and silver coins are coming back to us anyways after the occupation of Tibet. Once the highway was completed, trucks came, tanks came, guns came, and occupied us. They planned all this. And all the silver coins, the gold coins the Tibetans had all went back to China. Along with it, 75% of all the idols in the monasteries made out of gold and silver and diamond and all kinds of precious stones, all were taken to China, melted, and sold in the antique market. So hence you must know this part of history. That's why I wanted to emphasize that. Now, how is Tibet relevant? Now you might, if you hear all gloom and doom kind of story, you might feel bad. Now let me give you a positive story where India has played a role and Tibet has played a role, and it will be good for all of us. This is where I come to role of India and future of Tibet as well. In 7th and 8th centuries, Tibetan translators, Tibetan scholars came from Tibet to Nalanda University. And in India, they learned Sanskrit, they learned Buddhism. And 7th and 8th century, Buddhism was introduced to Tibet. Now, Nalanda University was demolished and collapsed in 13th century. So it lasted for 1,000+ years. But Tibetan scholars were so good, they learned Sanskrit so well, Buddhism so well, they translated the teachings of Buddha and students in Tibetan, and they preserve in Tibet. Now you know, there are so many Buddhist countries, all the ASEAN countries are Buddhist. Japan, China, everywhere. If you want to truly find teachings of Buddha, China has less than 24 volumes, less than 24 volumes on what Buddha and his disciple actually said. All the Buddhist countries, any of the Buddhist countries, they don't have more than 12 or 24 volumes of what Buddha and his disciples said. It is only in Tibetan language you have 300 volumes. Hence, if you want to know what Buddha said and his disciples said, nowhere in the world you will find, except in Tibetan language, Kangyur and Tengyur. So hence, Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan language, this Buddhist text is very important. Yes or no? Hence, preservation is very important. Now, what happened was in 1959, 1956 on, 98% of Tibetan monasteries and nunneries were destroyed. 99.9% of monks and nuns were disrobed, sent to labor camps. Many died of hunger, many died of starvation, many went to prisons as well. Now, Chinese government felt, Mao Zedong included, felt that while we have converted Tibet into China, we have converted Tibetans into Chinese, we won. But His Holiness Dalai Lama and 80,000 Tibetans, including my parents who came from Assam, that's what used to say, from Arunachal through Tejpur, they came to India. We rebuilt Buddhist monasteries from the ashes of destruction, brick by brick, stone by stone. We built Buddhist monasteries that you see everywhere, including Tawang. We call it Tibetan monasteries, but actually this is the replica and revival of Nalanda monasteries. Nalanda tradition. Now, His Holiness has plan A, B, C, D, E. A was revive Buddhism among exiled Tibetans, which we did successfully. Plan B was to revive Buddhism in the Himalayan belt, from Tawang to Laos Spiti to Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim, and Ladakh. Why? Because our plan was very simple, that if exiled Tibetans cannot go to Tibet and revive Buddhism, the people in the Himalayan belt can cross the mountains and revive Buddhism in Tibet. But now mountain terrain is very difficult. Now there's Magmohan line guarded by Chinese troops. You can't cross over that easily. Plan C was to revive Buddhism in all the Western world, including ASEAN countries, build a lot of Buddhist centers, teach foreigners Buddhism, and foreigners and their teachers will go back to Beijing and to Lhasa and revive Buddhism in Tibet. So they will take Continental Airlines or US Airlines or European Airlines and they fly because you cannot cross the mountain. Now, Plan D, if you go to Tibet now, Buddhism has been revived. From the ashes of destruction, from 98% of monasteries and nunneries destroyed, now most of the major monasteries in Tibet is revived. From 99.9% of monks and nuns disrobed, many, thousands and thousands of monks and nuns are practicing Buddhism in Tibet. But now, Chinese government policy is systematic destruction of Buddhism and Tibetan culture, Tibetan language, because they want to have cultural assimilation, assimilate Tibetans to Chinese. But in their private space, social space, Tibetans on their own, they have rebuilt these monasteries and nunneries. That shows the dynamism and hard work and determination of the Tibetan people. We are small in number, but after the destruction of 98 and 99%, normally you give up hope because you have only 1% chance of success. But we worked very, very, very hard. You know, interestingly, what has happened now? You know the largest Buddhist country in the world? Where is it? It's China. China has 300 to 400 million Buddhists. Now Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, they thought they will destroy Buddhism in Tibet and make into a communist atheist place. Instead, now Buddhism has not only revived in Tibet, it has revived in China. So I'm sure Mao Zedong is rolling in his grave thinking, what the hell happened? I wanted to go to Tibet and destroy everything. Instead, they brought Buddhism to China. Now, Buddhism has permanent place. Hence, the fight or the cause, non-violence or violence, peace or not. We Tibetans believed we will prevail. Peace will prevail, non-violence will prevail, because the competition between China and Tibetan people is very simple. It's a competition between Buddhism and communism. Communism is 100 years old. Only in 2021, Communist Party of China is going to celebrate its 100th year. Buddhism is 2,500 years plus old. And there will be Buddhism for another 2,500 years. As long as there's Buddhism, there will be Tibet, there will be Tibetan people, and Tibetan cause will live on. So in the global context, people are scared. What is this China, the rising China? We are scared. We are not. But historically, we have invaded them sometimes, they have invaded us sometimes, they have succeeded sometimes, we have succeeded sometimes. So we look Chinese as equals. And Buddhism is the foundation of civilization identity. Hence, you can clearly see we have a hope to win. So when Martin Luther King said, "When I climb the mountain top, I will see the equality of white and black Americans," I thought, if that's all you have to do to succeed, then I said, Tibetans are mountain people. We will climb mountain very easily, you know? So this is the determination of Tibetan people. From 98% and 99% destruction, we have risen. Not risen only in Tibet, but also in China. So hence, Tibetan people, I'm sure when you see people in Gauhati, in Northeast, you see the quiet, silent kind of people, but they're very determined kind of people. You know one fact? Panda, the animal. We all know, everybody says Chinese animal. No, it's Tibetan bear. 75% of the panda comes from Tibetan area. So that's why panda is lovely, cuddly, and friendly, because it's Tibetan bear, you see. Not only Tibetans are genetically peaceful, our Tibetan bear panda is also peaceful. China is dragon, it breathes fire. But when the fight comes between dragon and panda, we know. You saw panda kung fu, right? We win. Now, why Tibet is relevant, not just from a cultural civilization point of view, right? History, I just told you. For the peace of the world, for peace of Asia, and especially Northeast. Tibet is called the third pole. After Antarctica and Arctic, Tibet has the third highest reserve of ice. The difference is, in fact, Tibet ice or the glaciers are more productive because Antarctic and Arctic, when the ice melt, they go to ocean. When the Tibetan glaciers and snow and ice melt, they form fresh water, streams and rivers. The 10 major rivers of Asia flow from Tibet. You all know Brahmaputra is the lifeline of Assam. When my plane was descending yesterday, the flight was descending to Gauhati airport, I saw a lot of greenery in Assam. And I also saw the Brahmaputra flowing. The majestic male Brahmaputra, which cannot be controlled, I was told. Hey, that's the strength of Tibetan water, It flows from Tibet. Indus River, the cradle of Chinese civilization, the term India came from Indus River. It comes from Tibet. Satluj River, lifeline for Pakistan and whole of Kashmir, comes from Tibet. Mekong River, Irrawaddy River, Salween River, lifeline for whole of ASEAN countries. Vietnam, all these countries, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, they all depend on all these rivers. I'm sorry, it still comes from Tibet. They all come from Tibet. Yangtze River of China. We have heard these major dams built on Yangtze River, which is another male river perhaps, which could not be tamed, but they think they have tamed it. Well, it comes from Tibet. So, you can clearly see the Yellow River, the cradle of Chinese civilization. Again, it starts from Tibet. So 1.4 billion people in this whole region, South Asia, ASEAN, and East Asia, depend on water flowing from Tibet. So if we are not relevant, are we relevant now? For centuries, we have shared our water with all the neighboring countries. Now, you see bottled water here. You all have to pay, right, nowadays. We have shared free of cost. If you have to pay for water, Assam will owe us maybe 15% of your GDP. Had we charged $1 per bottle, I think Tibet would have been the richest country in the world, no? But we are Buddhists. We are panda, sharing with everybody. Hence, if you want to have all these rivers flowing to neighboring countries, Tibetan should be restored their role as the steward of the Tibetan plateau. Now, you read in the paper yesterday, China wants to divert Brahmaputra River, 1,000 miles tunnel from Tibet to Xinjiang. If that happens, what would Assam do? What would Northeast do? What would Bangladesh do? And the likelihood is high because China has 19% of the world population, but only 12% of fresh water, which means already 400 million Chinese are facing water scarcity. Now, if you have a well with water, and your uncle and relatives are all there in one place, and there's a neighbor which you like or don't like. If your well the water is going towards that neighbor, what would you do? If uncle and auntie and all your relatives say, we want water, we are dying of thirst, would you not divert your well towards your relatives than to your neighbor? So China is facing compulsion. And also, the monsoon of South Asia is determined by the Tibetan plateau. The climate of South America and North America are determined by the jet stream over Tibet. So for the whole world, Tibet is the refrigerator. Tibet is the fridge which cools the temperature, which maintains or checks the global warming, the climate change. If all these glaciers melt, they are melting very fast on the Tibetan plateau. What will happen to all the neighboring countries? Hence, Tibet is very relevant for peace, for water, for civilization, for the teachings of Buddha, and geopolitically for India and the whole world. So hence, what can India do? China says Tibet is one of their core issues. India should say Tibet is one of India's core issues for the sake of water, for the sake of history, for the sake of civilization and Nalanda tradition. Now, Nalanda University is destroyed. The Indian government or the Indian administration is taking too long. It's been 10 years, the Nalanda University is not built, not completely built. They're still in makeshift building. But we have preserved the teaching of Buddha. And also, Tibetans have contributed quite a bit for India. You know, I was driving yesterday here in Gauhati, just 2 days now, yesterday and today. I saw a lot of prayer flags in the cars and bikes of Indian cars, right? Om Mani Padme Hu, you see the prayer flags. What it does is it brings good luck to people who are hanging it. So as more and more prayer flags were flying in India, India's economy also grew. India's status as a number one also is growing. And we have also contributed momo in Thukpa. We all love momos, right? Well, we brought it from Tibet. Each time you eat momo, you should remember, oh, thanks to Tibetan people, you know. But if you want to have amala momo, authentic tasting momo, you must go to a Tibetan restaurant. By the way, some people are criticizing for putting ajinomoto in momo, right? Momo is Tibetan, ajinomoto is Chinese. Don't mix the two, you get sick, okay? Now, other than this, small day-to-day experience, what's most important is that if you want to have world peace, ahimsa is the key. And Tibetans follow Gandhian notion of ahimsa. We are the sole movement in the whole world nowadays, which we follow its ahimsa and nonviolence. We say nonviolence is the path, nonviolence is the process, and from nonviolence, the result that you get will be also nonviolent and peaceful. Hence, if we succeed, nonviolence will succeed once again. Ahimsa will succeed once again. Gandhian notion of ahimsa will succeed once again. If we succeed, justice and freedom will succeed again. The good guys will win once again. And I am born and brought up in Darjeeling area. And yesterday I met some people from Darjeeling area, but my hometown is between Darjeeling and Kalimpong in a small village. My family had just 1 acre of land. I wanted students to know. And at most we have 2 or 3 cows at any given time, dozen or so chicken. So my winter vacation from school was spent going to forests, cutting trees for home, sometimes illegally. Chaprashi used to catch us, yeah. And cutting grass for cows, cleaning cow dungs, help my mother milk cows, help my parents till 1 acre of land. That's how I grew up, in a humble background. Because I was introduced as someone from Harvard and all the 16 years at Harvard, doctorate at Harvard, things like that, right? But my beginning is I studied in refugee school, Tibetan refugee school. So dinner we used to get is only dal and bhat. No aloo dam, no dalle korsani, okay? And the lunch we used to get is curry and dumpling. Now, when I said curry, you are imagining, oh, Assamese fish curry. No. It was either radish for 3 months, potato for 3 months, cabbage for 3 months. That's the most available, cheapest vegetable in town. And the dumpling is not white, soft momo that you get in Tibetan restaurant. Okay, it was hard and dark. When you throw it, it bounces higher. So we have Vice Chancellor from science background. The only item that proves Newton's third law wrong, every action is equal and opposite reaction, that has more reaction. So that's how I grew up. So I didn't have pocket money to go to movies and things like that, right? But I worked very hard, very, very hard. So managed to go to Delhi University, Hansraj College and Campus Law Center. Finally, I got Fulbright scholarship and then managed to go to Harvard to do my master's degree. Then I got admitted doctorate degree. Then I finished my doctorate in 2004. Then I was employed. I was working at Harvard for 7 years. Then election happened. And I was the youngest of the other candidates. All the other 5 candidates were very veteran. Former Prime Minister, the Speaker, the Deputy Speaker, and most seasoned diplomat, and the long-time advisor or secretary to His Holiness Dalai Lama. They all were elder to me, but I won the election again. Now, why I say this is all the students who are here, I'm sure we are of similar background. Yesterday, I met some group from Darjeeling in the natural economics, the forum that's happening now. And I said, I'm also from Darjeeling. Oh, but one was from Bijanbari and Jorbangla, all that. I said, you all are Bazar Wala. You see, you're from town. I'm the Basti Wala. So anyone from Basti? Yes, we all are together. We will march to Delhi University and Harvard and come back. Now, what I did was, after 16 years in America, I left America, I left my job at Harvard, and I left Starbucks coffee for Assamese chai, and I'm back in Dharamsala. And the salary that I get now, with all respect to professors and vice chancellor, is only 30,000 rupees a month. So I left my job at America to come work for 30,000 rupees a month. Anyone who wants to join me? I'm sure you all are looking for jobs, right? But you will get less than 30,000 a month, okay? Because my salary is the highest. So I'm sure there was some interest before. Now suddenly 30,000, that sounds like a bit less even for my pocket money, no? And then nowadays, whenever I travel a lot. After 4 days, I have to go to Scandinavian countries and in Ottawa, and then come back. After 1 week, I have to go to America, things like that. And I travel when I fly, I travel by economy class. I don't fly business class. So that way, the Tibetan administration that you see in Dharamsala now is based on values. It's labor of love. You don't work there for salary. You don't work there for perks. You don't work there for bonus. So that is also part of India's contribution. No country has done more than this great country, India, and the people of India. But we have built an administration which is democratic. Now, let me tell you a story. When I ran for election in 2011, the former Prime Minister, we were the final 2 candidates, right? So we had a debate in Dharamsala. The next day we had debate in Delhi. So after we debated, when 2 candidates debate, it's quite harsh, right? Normally, it's very competitive. So we debated. After that, we had to go to Delhi, and so we looked at each other and said, why not we tax it together? So organizers of debate in Delhi were there in that car, and 2 of the candidates. We drove all the way to Delhi. He was also from San Francisco. I was from Boston. So as we were driving for 10 hours from Dharamsala to Delhi, we found we fell asleep. Then suddenly when I woke up, we found that the taxi driver was following a rule, traffic rule, which is green light, obviously drive. Yellow light, keep driving. Red light, look, keep driving. So we were a bit horrified, We had to stop them. But then we reached Delhi. And the Tibetan organizers also very philosophical, very Buddhist. They had forgotten the book Hotel Room. So they look around and finally at 2 a.m., they got 2 rooms. Right? One for organizers and one for 2 candidates. Now the election fever is going on nowadays, right? In India and Northeast or some places. And our recommendation, this is Tibetan Buddhist democracy, is candidates should share taxi together, hotel room together. Then they will save a lot of money. So this is the Tibetan version, which we learned from India. The original democracy is what we are implementing. And the Nalanda tradition is what we have preserved. And we are moving on and fighting the cause. So some might think odds are against you, but we don't think like that. We think odds favor us because our foundation of movement is based on 2,500 years of Buddhism, as I said. Communism is 100 years old. It's just a child. We'll beat them. And finally, when I say this, world peace, I'm pretty sure the world peace will prevail because Tibet is the litmus test for the whole world, for Asia, for India, and for China. Because we are the good guys. We follow nonviolence. We follow peaceful way. We follow moderate stand, middle way approach, right? We follow ahimsa. Now you see IS and Boko Haram, all this violence that's going on. Which one do you prefer? The Tibetan way, the non-violent way, the ahimsa way, the violent way? Non-violent way. I mean, that's common sense. But if you look around, non-violence do prevail. Soviet Union collapsed, non-violently. Berlin Wall came down, non-violently. When I met the former president of Poland, Lech Walesa, he told me that then Vice Chancellor of West Germany and Foreign Minister of West Germany was visiting him. Then Foreign Minister of West Germany asked him, what do you make of all the students and youth surrounding the Berlin Wall? And he said, the President Lech Walesa said, Berlin Wall is going to come down, be prepared. Then Foreign Minister of West Germany, what he said, I would like to see that kind of problem. But it's not going to happen in my lifetime. 2 weeks later, Berlin Wall came down. Even then, Foreign Minister of West Germany was not prepared for the Berlin Wall to come down. Just a neighboring country, Burma. 5 years ago, who would have thought Aung San Suu Kyi would free from her house arrest, walk the streets of Delhi and go to Oslo and accept a Nobel Peace Prize? Everybody say, oh, she's good, she's principled, but there's no hope. She's walking the streets of Rangoon. Nelson Mandela, he spent 28 years in prison, of which 8 years in solitary confinement. People wrote obituaries about Nelson Mandela, saying, oh, forget about restoring democracy in South Africa, he won't free himself. Nelson Mandela freed, democracy restored, equality prevailed in South Africa. East Timor, when I met Nobel laureate Ramos Horta, he said he got a lot of invitation from all over the world. One day he got invitation from Midwest of America. He changed 3 flights to get there. There was one guy to receive him at the airport. When he actually went there were 6 guys waiting at the cafeteria, and they're saying, we want to know about East Timor. Only 6 guys were interested to listen about East Timor. But comparatively, I can clearly see 1,000 people are interested here in Gauhati University to listen about Tibet. So we are doing pretty good, actually. But Vice Chancellor Ji also told me that you all were compelled to come. These classes were shut to make sure, so it's mandatory, That also I know. The fact that most of you are staying put, that means you are interested. That means a lot. So, hence, if you look at all these nonviolent movements which succeeded, collapse of Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall, Aung San Suu Kyi, Nelson Mandela, East Timor, so and so forth, we, the Tibetans, also follow nonviolence. Hence, we do believe our time will come sooner than later. 150 Tibetans have burned themselves, committed self-immolation just in the last 7-8 years. They're saying, we want to see the return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Tibet. We want to see basic freedom of the Tibetan people restored. 150 people to harm oneself to burn oneself and cry in pain for basic freedom and return of His Holiness Dalai Lama. It's no small matter. But none of these 150 Tibetans have harmed or hurt a single Chinese person or property. Tibetan administration, we discourage self-immolation, but it is happening. That shows how desperate Tibetans are, how painful and sad and tragic Tibet is, but at the same time how determined Tibetans are. And I hope that 60 years ago, His Holiness Dalai Lama and my parents came from Assam, northeast Arunachal Pradesh through Tezpur. We went to Dharamsala. Soon, I hope His Holiness Dalai Lama and Tibetan people will follow the same path, same track back from Dharamsala to Assam to Arunachal and go back to Tibet. That is the aspiration of Tibetan people. That is the dream of Tibetan people. That is the wish of the elder generation. Hence, we all must work together to make it happen. Why? Because as I said, I and the Tibetan leaders are born and brought up in India. We follow Indian democracy. We follow India's notion of ahimsa. So, nowadays Modi Sarkar talks about Make in India should succeed. If Make in India is to succeed, the original Made in India, the Tibetan movement has to succeed first. We are the original Made in India. So I hope and pray with your support and help, we will succeed. And we will come through Assam and go to Tibet. Thank you very much.